Hey, Inside the Tent listeners, just dropping in to let you know that 5 Campside shows, including the one we're talking about today, The Michigan Plot, have been nominated for Signal Awards, and you get to decide whether we win. So if you've enjoyed listening to Campside shows and want to support us, please go to bit.ly/votecampside and click on the links to vote. We'd really appreciate it. Voting ends on Thursday, October 17th. That's this week, so make sure to get your votes in by then. Once again, that's bit.ly/votecampside. Thanks so much.
Campside Media.
Hey, Campside listeners. Welcome to Inside the Tent, our series where we go behind the microphone of our hit podcasts, both new and from the catalog. I'm Josh Dean, one of the co-founders of Campside Media and host of several of our shows, but I also produce some of them, and today I'm talking about one of those, The Michigan Plot, hosted by Jessica Garrison and Ken Bensinger. Ken is a reporter at the New York Times, and Jessica is a reporter at the LA Times. But today we're talking about some work they did at a prior gig, while working for BuzzFeed, when they decided to investigate a story we probably all heard about, but never really understood. The attempted kidnapping of Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. It's an incredible story, and we're just going to get into it a little bit here. So if you haven't listened to that podcast, please do. But if you like this interview and you haven't already signed up for our behind-the-scenes series, head over to joincampside.com to become a free member of the Campside community. That's joincampside.com. Now here's my conversation with Ken Bensinger and Jessica Garrison. So take me back to the beginning. Where were you guys when you found this story, and how did it come to be?
Okay, so it was the fall of 2020, and it was the pandemic. And it was also a period here in Northern California of like pretty hideous smoke. And so we had sort of quarantined for a while, and then we had fled the smoke because the sun was blotted out by smoke. And we'd gone to my mom's house, and she lives down further west where there was no smoke, but she lives in a pretty rural part of California. So there was no smoke, but there was also no cell service. And I was kind of planning on, one of those days where you're air quote working. And then this happened. And as you know, I am a walking technological problem, but I truly didn't have cell service and was trying to coordinate all these reporters to chase this story. And at a certain point, I think I called Ken and said, "Can you come help?" And Ken, you came in and saved the day. That is how this all started. That's my recollection.
Yeah. Ken, what does that mean? What does she mean by you saved the day?
Well, this was a story that popped up, and we were both at BuzzFeed News at the time. There was still enough staff and people covering things that they had breaking news type reporters writing up what was a headline in every newspaper around the country, which was that the FBI and the Attorney General of Michigan had announced this big story. And so they all kind of jumped into it with just like writing off the press releases from the government, that kind of stuff. But there was interest in some other reporters kind of stepping back and digging a little deeper into what was known at the time and writing a story that provided more than just the sort of bullet point headlines of what was going on. And so because interest was there and Jessica was asking for help, I jumped in to try to wrangle some of the information into a story. And so with her expert guidance, I put all those words on a piece of paper, to a digital piece of paper, and she assembled them into sentences and paragraphs that make sense. And we put out a story that ran, I think, later the same day or the next day, kind of what you would call a second day story.
No one should go back and read it.
Yeah, which, like pretty much all the coverage from that time didn't age particularly well.
But did you both at the outset think this is what the headline was? Like, it's a group of terrible guys who tried to kidnap a governor, perhaps kill her, and this is a very dangerous thing to be happening in America?
I think we absolutely thought that.
Yeah, I think remember this press conference that was held on October 7th, 2020, this is a month before the presidential election, and things were really tense. It was a tense time. We were still very much deep in COVID right then. People were feeling nervous that we'd just gone through a summer of political violence and, upheaval over the Black Lives Matter protests and all that. And there was all these reports in the media and elsewhere that violence was just sort of bubbling under the surface of everything. And this seemed to confirm all those feelings. And our thinking was like, let's get to the bottom of what is going on with right-wing violence in this country and why it's so pervasive. That was our thinking at the time.
And even after January 6th, you still didn't understand the nuances of this story. Like, you didn't yet understand what had happened, how dangerous it was versus a setup.
No. We had no idea. I think our first inkling of it, and correct me if this is wrong, came when, for reasons that I no longer remember, I got very interested in this meeting at the Drury Inn, if that's how you say it, in Ohio, where all the kind of folks from all the 3%ers from all over the country came and had this meeting. And I was sort of fascinated by that. And so we started trying to figure out, learn what we could about that meeting, because that seemed like, crazy, right? That there was a summit of militia people from all over the country. And I think we eventually, through calling a lot of people, found a couple of people who were there, who were like, this is a total setup. They were like, this was like a picnic. We were just having a picnic. We were talking about the Constitution. There was no violence planned. There was no violence discussed. And having now heard the tapes of that, we know that that's not completely true either. But many of the folks that were there were so vehemently outraged at the idea that they had been plotting the murder of governors. That, I think, was the first inkling of like, this is interesting.
Yeah, and I think also, we had kind of an unusual opportunity because this story was a huge story when it first broke, but then just a series of wild political events kind of overshadowed it, right? We had the presidential election, then we had President Trump denying that he lost the election, and the kind of endless craziness and circus around the whole big lie as it developed back then, the election denial movement. And then you had January 6th and the fallout from that. And so really what happened in Michigan with the Whitmer plot kind of receded from the public view very quickly, much more quickly, I would say, than it normally would under normal sort of news environment. And Jessica and I think we're lucky in terms of reporting to be able to jump into that gap. We hadn't forgotten the story and found time in between our other work to keep poking at this thing and looking at it and not giving up on it, and found ourselves doing things like watching preliminary hearings in this case that almost nobody else was even paying attention to.
Yeah. That was the second thing, that you listened to that. In fact, that might have been the first thing. You listened to that preliminary.
Yeah, there was a 3-day hearing in March.
And found out about the other informant. Oh, I'm so sorry for editing you out of the formative stage of this story. My apologies.
It's okay, but there was you are the protagonist, but there was a hearing in March 2021 that I listened to, a 3-day hearing, and my only protagonism was that I was able to get up at the ungodly hour to listen to it, because I think it started at 8:30 or 9. Eastern, and
Eastern. It was very early here.
Oh,
both of us are in Pacific time, so I was getting up at like 5 a.m. to listen to 3 straight days of this. But it was really incredibly revealing. So much more came out about the case than had come out in the court documents. And by the time it was over, the feeling was like, whoa, this is really different than what they told us in October. There are government informants crawling all over this case in a way they didn't really talk about it before. And the main informant, who testified for a full day during this hearing, has this story that basically puts him at the center of every single activity that ever happened in this case. And so at that point we thought, well, we got to find people, we got to source up. And we were fortunate. We also had editors overseeing us that gave us the room and time to do that.
So we're all journalists and we're not supposed to have political stances, but we probably all do. And generally they're probably not on the far right part of the spectrum. But did this story challenge you in ways that surprised you in terms of like who you were identifying with, or who you felt sympathetic for, or who you felt was necessarily right or wrong?
Yeah, it's tricky because, at no point would I ever say, nor did I ever feel in the course of reporting this, that the people we were writing about, the defendants in this case, were these sort of like innocent lambs, or these wonderful, upstanding contributors to society that just got framed for zero reason whatsoever. I think a phrase I use over and over again when people was like, these are not guys you'd want to have a beer with. They're very precariously perched in society. They're angry people. They have insane ideas. Even the ones who aren't like scary and threatening will talk you endlessly about like the meaning of the U.S. Constitution to a degree that you just, you really want to cut your own veins after a while because it just never stops. They're not the most sympathetic bunch of people. But what I think it did draw from this was that even unsympathetic people deserve fair treatment, fair and honest and good faith treatment from something as powerful as federal and state prosecutors. And so for me, it was like a big reminder of how powerful the government can be and how sometimes it really feels like the deck is kind of stacked, that the government, for motives that aren't, I don't think, sinister in a deep state way or conspiratorial, but more sort of in a kind of boring bureaucratic way, which is FBI agents want to make cases to move up the ladder. Prosecutors want to get convictions so they can get jobs at fancy law firms. Everyone wants to advance their career and look good. For those kind of prosaic reasons, the deck can sometimes get stacked and people can overlook inconvenient truths or push angles or theories that may not really hold up because there's an incredible systemic resistance to going anywhere with a case like this except towards charging people.
I think that I didn't go into this case thinking that our criminal justice system is perfect. And I didn't come out of it thinking our criminal justice system is perfect. I mean, if these people are quote unquote innocent, they are far from the only innocent people in prison in America. And I think, what was interesting about this case all the way through, from day one to day now, is that it's kind of a nuanced question of, they were being recorded the whole time. So we know what they said and we know what they did. And it's sort of in the eye of the beholder. Well, do you think that's a crime? And I think that's part of why you've seen split juries on this, right? Because some juries are like, no, that's not a crime. And other juries have, you can argue very reasonably about whether all the juries got all the evidence because they didn't. But I do think people are really wrestling with, is what these people did in conjunction with FBI informants a crime or not? And that's what's interesting about it, I think.
Yeah, it can satisfy any opinion in a way, but also subverts your expectations. That's what I hear from a lot of people who listen to it, just that it's like, I didn't come out of it feeling the way I thought I would come out of it. And you can understand both like how Whitmer's chief of staff feels, I'm sure, if you were like, come on, man, this thing is ridiculous. And they're going to say, well, are we supposed to not take it seriously when someone threatens to kidnap the governor? And what happens the time that we don't take it seriously and the governor's killed, right? And then on the other hand, it's like, it's a very good chance these guys don't do anything if the FBI doesn't put the metaphorical gun in their hands, right? It was like very much possible that a bunch of yahoos smoke weed in a vacuum store basement and nothing ever happens.
Right.
Until you inject somebody competent provided by the government, right? Which also seems pretty absurd. So I don't know what there probably is no right or wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's clear the government overstepped, but also shouldn't they sometimes?
I mean, that's what's interesting about it, right? Because if the government had been listening to all this and been like, don't even worry about it, we're just going to move on, we would not think that was cool either, right?
Totally. And I think it's really been interesting to see people's reactions to it. People can listen to the podcast and form their own opinions. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but what was it about the story? I mean, I know, Ken, you and I knew each other a little bit. We had friends in common. They suggested there could be a podcast in this, and that's kind of how it happened. But did it ever occur to you guys that there might be something more than just the series of articles? Was there something that felt like this could be a podcast?
I guess we sometimes speculated about what could be done with this. There was so much there. There's much more than you could ever fit into into an article. And so maybe we had like sort of not particularly advanced conversations about, is there a book someday? Is there something else? Podcast was something we thought about a little bit because I think a few people actually said it to us. One of the issues we thought early on was, well, for podcasts, it's an audio format. You need lots of audio. And we were already having problems with the court or with the prosecutor's office, more like, in terms of getting copies of the audio that they were playing in court. So we had problems, which we technically continue to have intransigence issues with both federal and state prosecutors in this case about not wanting to hand over things that we believe are in the public record from the case. And so early on, we didn't have that much audio to work with. So I think it was only later that it became clear that a podcast could be possible.
Yeah, trying to imagine this podcast had we not gotten all those recordings from the wiretap.
It would have been a really different situation.
Yeah, a lot more of you guys summarizing your reporting and reading from court transcripts. And it's really incredible what we heard, literally like riding shotgun on the conspiracy, or conspiracy in quotes.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, it's a luxury, I guess, because we got that material to be able to let the sort of story, so to speak, tell itself, as opposed to the audio equivalent of talking heads, you know, explaining what they did in the past, and then maybe having actors do recreations. I think we had to do recreations for one or two things, but it was more like just people reading scripts. But it was, you know, we didn't have to make up anything or pretend we were in a situation we weren't, because we had the audio of what really happened.
It also helped turn what could have been a very heavy, dark, serious, overly political podcast into something that a lot of people enjoyed too. Like, that it was fun because those characters, you guys could never bring them to life in the way they brought themselves to life, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of stuff that we didn't know about that came out through these files. It like simply just wasn't anywhere that we would have reported on it, because it was like some of the funny scenes we focused on, the road trip to Wisconsin or whatever. It's not going to be like, no one on the prosecution or the defense is going to ever bring that up on their own. They're not going to talk about the jokes these guys told or the songs they sang in the car, because they're not germane to the criminal charges at hand, right? But they are super germane to giving the audience a sense of who these people are, what they're like, and also maybe, as you talked about, removing some of the heavy atmosphere from the topic.
Yeah, they just sound like a bunch of 20-somethings going on a road trip, right?
Some goofballs, yeah.
We all have, Jessica, you have teenage boys, or maybe they're not teenagers anymore, but that road trip's not so different than like a lacrosse team, probably.
Right. No comment.
Well, sadly, BuzzFeed News is no longer, so the outlet that you covered this for is gone. But what are you guys doing now?
I am a reporter for the New York Times. After the great bulk of our reporting for BuzzFeed about the Whitmer case was over, unfortunately, BuzzFeed was going through some tough financial times and offered me and some other people the opportunity to leave. So we did. And I got lucky to get a job at the New York Times, where I'm a politics reporter. So I've been very busy this year covering the presidential campaign.
I'm a reporter at the LA Times. I covered Northern California.
So you're doing more fires, and what does that beat mostly contain?
Let's see. I mean, it's half the largest state in the country. So it's a lot of criminal justice. It's a lot of water. I'm going to go kayaking down the Russian River next week. And last week I was at the oldest Chinese restaurant in America.
Those both sound like very fun stories.
They are fun. Yeah.
Meanwhile, Ken's like in the darkest corners of 5chan, hanging out with Pepe the Frog enthusiasts.
Yeah, pretty much. I have really fun friends who message me on social media and offer curious theories about humanity and me and my children and all sorts of things. So it's always delightful every day.
Did you go to the Republican convention?
I did, yeah.
How'd that go? They love the New York Times.
You know, actually, you would think it would be a nightmare.
I think they do, actually.
They do. That crowd definitely does. There are people who like want to harass New York Times reporters, but the RNC crowd and all these delegates turn out for the most part to be not the crazy MAGA types. They tend to be like longtime Republican apparatchiks, and they have some sense of liking different structures and institutions in the country. And so they sort of were all very cheerful. A lot of them were like, I'm a New York Times subscriber, was a common refrain at the RNC. So the crazy people at the RNC were the people in the media hall, or they call it Radio Row, which is like where all the podcasts are being done. And that's where all the like hardcore right-wing podcasts that you hopefully never have to listen to are arrayed. And you can truly, like, an amazing thing is to walk around Radio Row at the Republican convention and see, like, it's like a central casting. It's like what's like the cantina from Star Wars.
You're gonna get yourself in trouble.
It's like I know. It's like the cantina from Star Wars. Every like wild personality you could possibly imagine in the right-wing ecosphere is just like walking around, going from booth to booth, doing interviews.
My last question, and you can lie to me about this, is would you make another podcast? Did you like making a podcast? It's different than what you do.
I definitely would, given the right topic. I think this is, for the most part, all projects have their ups and down moments, but I thought this project, probably because the chemistry of all the people involved in it was so great, was at times super fun to do, and learned a lot about storytelling too. And, our producer on this project, Ryan Swikert, who I think Jessica and I both agree is kind of like a genius. He taught me a ton about storytelling and about research and how to sort of marshal facts into a coherent whole. I mean, I don't know if Jess feels this way as well, but one of the great gratifying moments for me was that Ryan kind of disappeared for a while and submersed himself in all this audio and listened to countless dozens, scores, hundreds of hours of audio that was from the whole case. And when he came out of it, he kind of built a timeline of what he thought the case was about and an impression about what he felt like the takeaways were. And what was really gratifying for me was that it wasn't a perfect match, but it very closely fit the version of the story that Jessica and I had figured out over a year and a half of reporting on the case from using different materials. And so the fact that he used a kind of a different data set to come to a similar conclusion really boosted my confidence in the story, and also in this case taught me a lot about how powerful the audio medium can be.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think the team that Campside put together to support this podcast was incredible. I have one and only one complaint about Ryan Swikert, which is that having traveled to Michigan with him, he does not eat nearly as often as I do, and that was a source of some conflict. But other than that, I think he's incredible. And it was like a poor man's version of what must happen when someone makes a movie out of something in your head, right? It was watching this thing come to life in a way that I really don't feel like I can take much credit for it because I didn't figure out how to put it together in an audio way, but it was amazing. So yes, I would do another podcast.
I'm glad you guys mentioned, hosts get most of the credit for podcasts, and I'm a host myself, so I often take the credit, but it is a really collaborative process. So I'm glad you both mentioned Ryan. Also, Ewan, who's on this call right now, did a lot of the music and sound design.
Mike Meyer, let's not forget, our story editor, was great.
Yeah, it really is it's a collaborative effort to make these things, and we try and pair the hosts, who typically in our case are journalists like you guys or me, and then we can't do it alone. And I think the result here was a meeting of various minds, some of whom had never heard of the story or worked on it before, and then you guys who knew it really well, but maybe knew it too well. And it's sometimes hard when you know a story super well and it sprawls like this one to figure out how do we make this into a single coherent narrative.
Yeah.
And to springboard off that and to answer your earlier question about doing another podcast, I mean, the answer is an unqualified yes. If I get to work with people like you guys again, absolutely.
All right. We appreciate that. Thanks again to Ken and Jessica and the rest of the Michigan Plot team. And thank you for listening to Inside the Tent. Don't forget to head over to joincampside.com to become a free member of the Campside community. That's joincampside.com.